Hi guys, welcome. So today we're going to finish discussing what happened in chapters 12 and 13 in Phantom Tollbooth. So our content framing question is, what's happening in 12 and 13 in Phantom Tollbooth? So what is 12 and 13 about? Right, the Valley of Sound, yeah, and the Soundkeeper, okay, right, Dr. Discord, yeah, okay, good. All right, so it was a little bit of wordplay there, right? So it was called the Valley of Sound, but what happened? Right, no one was allowed to talk. When Milo got to town, he saw a lot of what? Right, protesters. They had signs up. Were they talking? Were they chanting like we see on TV? No, you're right. They just had signs up, right? Because the soundkeeper would not allow them to have sounds or to be able to talk, right? So did Milo agree with that in our story? No, he didn't, right? He felt like the sound should be given back to the people and that people should be allowed to talk and have conversations. You're absolutely right. Okay, so that's going to build up to what we're going to talk about today. We are going to start working on our narrative writing. When we did this before, we talked a lot about our character snapshot. That was our previous task that we worked on. Okay, we had that one character that we created, right, at Abandoned Elementary School. And that character, even though he may have met Milo, he didn't have much interaction with Milo yet. We really wanted to focus, that's what that snapshot meant. We really wanted to focus on developing our character. Well, we're going to take that same character to help us with our writing that we're going to work on today, okay? So we're going to cover two standards today. We are going to cover our writing 5.2 and our 5.5. Okay, and 5.3. All right, so we're going to develop our narrative. This narrative is going to be an exploded moment. Okay, an exploded moment is what happened between Milo and the Soundkeeper. All right, they had that conflicting information. They didn't agree. They had a big disagreement when it came to how the sound should be handled. And then what happened? Right, the townspeople wanted to sacrifice Milo. Okay, they wanted to use Milo's words. All right, so there was a big conflict there and there was a challenge for Milo. All right, so we're going to develop that exploded moment, okay, in a narrative. Remember, narrative writing is just telling a story. All right, but you have to tell a story in order, right? Milo and your character have to meet and talk a little bit first, and then it develops from there. All right, so our character is going to face challenges. Okay, Milo's going to face challenges. He's faced challenges throughout the entire book, right? So think of it this way. We're going to start talking about abandoned again, which we know that abandoned means deserted or left behind, okay? And we're going to take our writing and we're going to develop it from there, all right? So the first thing I want to do is introduce the craft question that we're going to execute today. And it says, how do I use narrative structure to help plan a Juster? Remember, Juster is our author for the book. A Juster-like exploded moment scene. So that is that big scene that happens between two characters that are talking back and forth and they disagree. So you're going to have a conflict and you're going to have a resolution, okay? But it has to revolve around school and learning because remember, your character is at Abandoned Elementary School, okay? So Milo's going to come into town and Milo is like, oh my gosh, I'm in this abandoned town. That means everything's abandoned, right? Because that's what the word means. So even the bridge is not finished. So he has no idea where he's going at this point. So then he pulls up and he looks at Abandoned Elementary School. Okay? And he says, maybe, just maybe there's somebody there. Because if you remember when we did our character snapshot and we read about abandoned, when they looked in the window, there were plates of food. Everything was just left, like people had just left in a second. So the plates of food were still there, that kind of thing. So he pulls into Abandoned Elementary School, and he's already seen all this. So he's like, I don't know if there's anybody there, but I really need to know where I'm supposed to be going, so let's go see. Okay, so he decides to go into Abandoned Elementary School to ask for directions to Digitopolis, okay? So now we're moving to Digitopolis. Before we were at Dictionopolis, which means city of words. So what do you think this city might be? Right, city of numbers. You're right, okay? So he's going to go into Abandoned Elementary and he's going to meet your character, okay? Whatever you named your character, remember it had to be something to do with the word abandon using the synonyms I gave you, And what's a synonym? Right, it's two words that mean the same thing. Okay, so he's going to go in, he's going to meet your character, and he's going to ask for directions. All right, so he's going to do this, but then they have to have some conversation, some kind of dialogue. Okay, remember how we showed dialogue in our writing. How do we do that? How do we know that two characters are talking? Right, by using quotation marks. Good job. All right, so he goes in to meet your character, and he learns about how different school and learning is at Abandoned Elementary compared to where he came from. Okay? So then there's a challenge there because Milo has his own ideas about school and learning, and your character has their own ideas about school and learning. Okay? So there's our conflict. They're not going to be the same. So your task is to write that exploded moment, and it should feature a conversation between Milo and your character. Remember, you have to use quotation marks. And it has to include the conflicting ideas. Your character thinks one way and Milo's character thinks the other way. All right? But the ideas have to relate to the meaning of the word abandon, just like when we created our character. Okay? So as you work on this narrative and as you develop your narrative, you're going to work on revising to strengthen the dialogue exchange between your characters. Remember, dialogue is that conversation. So make it a good conversation that has wordplay in it, that is very descriptive. Use your precise words. Remember, we've talked about the difference between using just general words and making it nicer. We could just say the sky, or we could say, we saw the moon shining brightly and it gave us enough light to see. Things like that. You can elaborate and include more details in your writing. Okay? So in your narrative, you should establish your characters, where they are, and what's going on. So talk about how Milo showed up at Abandoned Elementary School and met your character. And then what's happening in the situation. You're going to develop the action with the dialogue, which is our conversation. You're going to show how the character's ideas about school and learning challenge Milo's. And show the responses to each other's ideas. Okay? You're going to alternate between dialogue and describing what's going on. Okay, so you have that narrative role. Remember, the narrator is the one telling the story. Okay, so you're going to have those narrative pieces in there. All right, you're going to include an ending that provides new learning or understanding that Milo has gained as a character. Remember, it grows his character. It makes him a better character. All right, you're going to incorporate wordplay. And don't forget, you have to use correct punctuation. Capital letters, periods, question marks, quotation marks, etc. That's all in your rubric. Okay? So what you're going to do now, what you're going to work on now is on workbook page 19, you have an exploded moment planner. So right now I want you to work in your groups and you're going to start planning your exploded moment. Ask your group members, what do you think about if my character said this? What are you going to do for this? Okay, so help each other in your group. Go ahead and brainstorm and plan this out so that we can begin working on our writing tomorrow. Okay, so peer tutors in groups. Elijah, Ariana, Brianna, and Cohen. Make sure that if someone has a question that you can answer, help them out with that. If you can't answer it, be sure to come and ask me because that's what I'm here for. All right, Sarah, Elisha, Brayla, Micah, and Gage. You are our peer helpers, okay? Make sure everyone's on task. Make sure everyone's following directions, that kind of thing. If anyone needs help, make sure that you ask one of your classmates that's in your group and then come back and ask me if they can't help you. Okay? Peer tutors, that's also your job. Okay? If someone needs help with those precise words, if someone else thinks of a word, hey, you could use this word instead of this word. Let's do that, okay? Instead of, he was staring at a blank screen, you could change that into saying, when Milo looked at the wall, it was a vision of black. He could not see anything. Okay? Change it up. Add those details. If you can't think of any, ask one of your partners or one of your group mates to help you. Okay? So that's what you're working on right now. You're brainstorming so that you can begin planning for your writing. Students will be provided immediate feedback as I go through and start reading what they're putting for their brainstorming, whether it's an electronic version or whether it's a paper version. As long as I'm looking for if they've started describing the conflict, if they've started trying to figure out how to resolve it, if students are struggling at all Then I will make sure that I offer some suggestions to them that they may not have thought about, or encourage them to match an idea I give them with one of their own. Like, hey, you could do this. You could try adding that your character's idea of school was different because he was bullied or something like that. So just to offer a suggestion that they could match on their own, to try to encourage them to come up with their own ideas. And then a lot of times what I use for struggling students or sentence starters to help them get started, or if it's a particularly difficult part of their writing that they may not know how to start or to end, or what do I even say here, a lot of times I'll go into the individual student and provide a sentence starter for them just to give them an idea, and so that they're not stuck on that one thing and can't move past it. Generally with our struggling learners, that's what happens, is they see part of it, they get overwhelmed, and they can't move past it. So for some of those students, definitely our IEP students and things like that, I will provide a sentence starter just so that they have something to start from and they're not hung up on this little part that frustrates them or overwhelms them so much. Then I go through, and if I see a student's really struggling, I will go through and work with that student one-on-one as much as possible, to try and make sure that they are understanding either what they're doing or the outcome of what that final product needs to look like. A lot of times when students understand where they're going, then they know, and it gives them a little bit more reassurance of, okay, this is what I have to do to get there. But if they don't know what their final product should look like or what it should be about, then they really tend to struggle on, how am I going to get there if I don't know what that ending is? So generally providing an outcome for them, allowing them to know where they're supposed to go with their task, with their writing, whether it's writing or reading. With students that struggle with reading comprehension, being able to break things down for them a little bit more and teaching them how to use their context clues generally helps as well.